with 800 medical students, it's a real challenge to find enough good clinical clerkships for them all, particularly in some of the specialties that don't have a lot of patients in the hospitals. So like psychiatry, pediatrics, and obstetrics. It's hard to find 200 placements every 6 weeks or so for our students. As a result, we use quite a few hospitals to do this. Tufts Medical Center, what used to be New England Medical Center, is still our principal teaching hospital, but it's a relatively small hospital. It has fewer than 400 beds. We have 200 students. There is no way that they could do all of our teaching. So we use a number of hospitals as main affiliates and send a lot of students to them. So our major affiliates are the Leahy Clinic, St. Elizabeth's, which many of you know, Newton Wellesley, Maine Medical Center, and we have a whole different program up in Maine than we had when most of you were here. We've always had some, or we've had on and off relationships, but they were more on than off over the last 50 years. But now we have a very special track there, and it's considered a regional campus, and 20% of our medical students are up in Maine. And it's really aimed at trying to increase the workforce, the healthcare workforce in Maine. And it's been a very successful program. And for years we had Bay State Hospital, but somewhat to our surprise, in the last year, we learned that they and UMass had negotiated that they were going to become a UMass hospital and have a UMass campus there. And although we still are retaining some clinical slots there, it's no longer going to be a major site for us. It'll become quite a minor site, which we're not at all happy about. It was a wonderful training site, and we would have loved to have kept it, but that isn't what happened. So that's what what the numbers look like. The demographics of medical school looks very different than the demographics of the people in this room. Now our student body is slightly more than 50% female. We have about 20% of the class are minorities. About 20% are Asian, which we don't consider a minority. So the class is very different than the classes that I went through and that many of you who are near my age went through, where it was 115 men and 5 women, and a smattering of minorities. And we think this is really a good thing. First of all, it's good for the public. We're training doctors who will look like patients that they're going to take care of. It really teaches our students about cultural sensitivity when their classmates are from various cultures. And that's extremely important as this country changes its demographic look, that we produce doctors for the 21st century who will be comfortable and whose patients will be comfortable with their understanding of the new doctor-patient relationship. So that's a major evolution that's taking place here. The facilities here, for years we used to apologize to applicants that we have a great faculty and Boston's a great place to be and you'll learn a lot here, and our facilities aren't so good, but it's the faculty that counts. Well, it is the faculty that counts, but the facilities count too. And we've done a lot to improve our facilities since many of you were here. And now I understand we have one person from the class, from the 65th class. And he actually went to medical school on Huntington Avenue, is that right? So, and while you were there, did we transfer down here? Yes, first group. You were the first group to to be on this campus. And then before that, the medical school was located where the Four Seasons is. And if you look outside in the corner of Charles Street and Boylston Street, there's a brass plaque on the sidewalk that says the former site of the Tufts Medical School. That had been long forgotten, and just a few years ago, it was called to our attention, and now we send somebody over there every year to polish the brass. So if you look for it, if it stops raining, it's there, sort of on the back side of near the back side of the hotel. So the facilities here, as you remember, were moved here to be near the hospital, and they didn't build new facilities. They took an old clothing factory, which it turns out my wife's uncle owned. There was no conflict of interest. I had nothing to do with it. It was long before my time. But I'm told that Uncle Charlie held out for years, knowing that someday Tufts would buy it. He'd get some money for it. And his grandsons subsequently graduated from our class about 5 or 6 years ago. Anyway, I've never told that story before. So those of you who trained in the M&V building, which our students wonder what the V was, but you know it was veterinary, before the veterinary school moved out to Grafton, trained in an old building, not built to be classrooms or laboratories, but they were used for that for all these years. And in the basement, the anatomy laboratory has been for about 50 or 55 years, although I understand some of you were on the 8th floor in an anatomy lab before this current one, which I had not heard before this weekend, that it had been up there. Anyway, the anatomy lab in the basement was built for 120 students, and we now have 200 students per class, and we have 200 dental students who use it, and we have 50 physician assistants students who use it. And there's actually demand from some of the biomedical device makers around the Boston area to have access to an anatomy lab so they can try out new joints and things like that. Anyway, we have for years felt the need for a new anatomy lab because this one not only is crowded with 200 students, with the additional number of cadavers that we have in there, the ventilation isn't adequate, and we've kept having to repair, to fix up the ventilation to keep it up to code. And if you go down there now when it's in use, it's like a tornado's going through there to keep the air quality breathable. So you can't hear. Anyway, it's way out of date. We were very lucky after discussing this with our most generous alumnus, Steve Jaharis, who's actually, it was class of '87. This is actually his 30th reunion, but he wasn't able to be here because he's coming again next week for our Board of Advisors meeting, and he's a practicing family doc in Chicago, in the Chicago area. We got Steve interested in building a new anatomy lab. And under his, with his help, the Jaharis Family Foundation gave us $15 million, of which $13 million was for the renovation, or for the creation of a new anatomy lab, on the condition that the university would match that money because it's really close to a $30 million project. And the university has done that. And we are now building a new anatomy lab, which we can't show you because it's really just an old, it's a busy work site right now. But it's on the 3rd floor of the M&V building, and it will be finished in December. Oh, they are going to see it. I take that back. Anyway, they're not. I suspect they're not working today, so you don't need hard hats. So you're not going to get hard hats to take home. But it'll be finished in December, and in January, the class, which has already been selected for next year. The one that'll start in August of this year will have their anatomy in the new laboratory. So it's going to be very exciting. And as I mentioned last night, we're planning an event to celebrate that, and also to kick off the 125th anniversary year of the medical school. And we had to plan it when they can assure us it'll be finished, or finished enough that we can take people in there, but before we bring cadavers in. So we had a 2-week window in December, and sometime in mid-December we'll be having a big festivity, which we hope many of you will join. So this has been a wonderful boost for the medical school. Anatomy remains one of the most valued courses by students. They still love it, even though the facilities are bad. There are no locker rooms. They change in the halls. I mean, it's embarrassing what we put up with for all these years. Now there's going to be locker rooms and showers, but more important, they're going to be technologically enabled classrooms, so that we can teach students the correlation between the dissections that they're doing and what they would see if they were seeing images of these. So we're hoping to have CAT scanning equipment and ultrasound equipment, so that they can start learning right as they're doing anatomy what this would look like if they were a real patient and they couldn't cut them open to see what was the problem. We think that'll really enhance the anatomy teaching. So the good news is the Jaharis gift will get the building built, and it'll be spacious and well ventilated, and will certainly work much better. The challenge is that we're going to need to be raising funds for some of this ancillary equipment that's going to make it the ultra-modern laboratory, and we'd certainly love to talk to anybody who'd like to participate in that, because as part of the new campaign, which the university is about to start in November, the anatomy lab is actually one of the first fruits of that campaign, and we will be looking to raise money to enable this lab to reach its full fruition. Next time you come, we'll have a functioning anatomy lab, and we hope when you talk to the students, they'll rave even more about the place than I understand they did yesterday when you talked to many of them. So we're very excited about that. So that serves the medical students and our PA students, as well as the dental students. Our medical education here, I think, from what most of you have told me, and alumni have told me as I've gotten to know them over the last decade, that they think they got a great education here, and we're glad for that. We keep improving it. We improve it because medicine has changed, scientific knowledge has changed, and a lot has changed about our understanding about how adults learn. So we now no longer teach all of our courses in large lectures, but much of it is done in small groups. They now talk about the flipped classroom, which means that instead of the students coming here for a lecture, they come here to discuss a lecture, which they may have watched on their computer, so that the lecture assignments frequently are done before they get here. And in many courses, they meet in small groups with a faculty facilitator to discuss what they're learning and what the lecture material was, and to answer questions, but not to just have them all sit here taking notes and expecting to be able to regurgitate it onto an exam. Another thing that's changed is that most of the courses the medical students take are pass-fail now. They don't get graded. So the good news is they're not in competition with each other for how they're doing in the class, and it makes for a much more cooperative and friendly relationship. You almost never see students just studying by themselves. They're studying in groups or in pairs, and they use the facilities here for studying. And if you haven't seen the Sackler building across the street, which with the aid of a previous $15 million gift from the Jaharis family was totally rebuilt about 8 years ago and equipped to help us teach in small groups. So we eliminated one of the two big auditoriums over there. We've created small rooms to accommodate 8 or 10 people. We have some classrooms that'll accommodate more than that, but and then when we're not using the classrooms, the students use them to study. And for many years, and I think from many of you, you came here during the day for the lectures, and you left and went back home afterwards because this wasn't a pleasant place to be. Now we have trouble getting them out of here. We close the place at midnight because we think they ought to get some sleep, but they're here from early in the morning until midnight, 7 days a week, studying. And if you're coming in here on an evening or on a weekend and you walk through, there are students in all the rooms studying, sometimes in groups, in big groups, little groups, and sometimes by themselves. And we've converted the library into a digital library. We still have some books, but they don't get used much. Everything's done digitally now. And with the wonderful resources that are available online through our library, they can see any journal and they can see any textbook. And their whole curriculum is embodied in a syllabus that our faculty produces, which is online. And they don't really need to buy textbooks anymore. We all have on our bookshelves the textbooks we had in medical school with various dates on them that were our Bibles. And we all knew when we got them, they were already 3 years out of date by the time they got printed. And now things change so fast that textbooks really aren't so useful anymore. So that's a big change. So that's some of what's going on in medical education, and we can talk more in question and answers about that. We also have a research faculty here, and we have in the basic sciences, we have about 75 tenure or tenure track researchers whose job is to do research. When you were here, their job was to teach medical students, and that has slowly changed as first of all, the body of knowledge has grown so much that you can't teach medical students biochemistry anymore or physiology anymore, or there wouldn't be time for them to learn anything else. So we really need to, we've gradually, with a lot of reluctance on the part of the basic scientists, had to trim back what the course content is of these, and we've integrated them so that we look at them by systems, not by the traditional silos of the disciplines, and that's continuing. And many medical schools are now moving to 1 year of basic sciences and 3 years of clinical work, and we're not quite there. Although our curriculum committee is looking at shortening the second year and lengthening the third year. Again, we've done that once before. We added 2 months to the third year. The last time we did a curriculum reform about 7 or 8 years ago. And the committee is meeting now and will come forward with a recommendation within the next couple of months. And then it takes a couple of years to implement it. But again, the aim is to get students involved in clinical activities earlier than it was for you, and earlier than it is now. So right now, our first year students in May, so at near the end of their first year, start going to a doctor's office, a primary care doctor's office, and about 75% of them are family doctors, here in eastern Massachusetts and in Maine. And the rest are pediatricians and internists. But they go to the same office every week for a year. So they go all through their second year, which is wonderful. First of all, it means their first introduction to clinical medicine is with a primary care doctor who's actively involved in primary care and likes teaching. And as a result, many of our students choose to go into primary care, many more than ever did before, because of that early influence in their their medical school career. And then right now, they finish their second year in March, and we give them about 6 weeks to study for boards at that point. And unfortunately, the board exams have taken on a new importance across the country because most medical schools have gone to pass-fail the way we have. So the only thing that internship committees can look at, aside from interviewing the candidate, is board scores to see whether where they should rank amongst the various applicants they have. So that's put a lot of pressure on the boards. We very much try not to teach to the boards. We're trying to teach what we think they need to learn, but we've got to give them time to pass the boards too. So we give them 6 weeks minimum to work on this, and then a large group of them take it towards the end of April, and the ones who are not so sure of themselves can put it off a little bit and take it a month or two later. It is worrisome that some of them get so nervous about the board, since it's the first exam of consequence that they've taken since they left college, that we've had an increasing number who tell us they can't do it, they got to take a year off to study, which we don't really approve of, and we're trying to work on how to solve that problem and to make sure they are ready for the boards without designing our curriculum to teach to the boards. So that's some of what's going on there. In the meantime, the basic science faculty, who used to be here to teach medical students, now are here to teach PhD students and to do research. And research, unfortunately, is a losing proposition for just about every medical school. It costs Tufts Medical School about $20 million of money that we have to put in to keeping the research going because the NIH grants don't cover all of it. There are gaps in the grants in between grants, and it's just expensive to run a research facility. I was talking to somebody who was the former executive administrative dean at Harvard Medical School just last week, and he told me that they lose $100 million on it. Harvard can afford to lose $100 million. We can't. It's become a real problem for us. As many of you know, we have either the highest or one of the highest tuitions in the country. And the reason is we have very limited sources of income compared to other medical schools. Our sources of income are tuition, which is our largest, the NIH, which is next, and then endowment, which is much less. It's about 8% of our budget, and most of it is committed already to scholarships or to professorships. So it doesn't flow to our bottom line and help relieve other deficits. And that's why our tuition is so high. Other medical schools either have state support, or many medical schools, and some of you probably practice in such places, have their own hospitals and clinics. Or if they don't have their own hospitals, the faculty belongs to the medical school. They have a faculty practice. And in those situations, the medical school is able to get money from the clinical side to support their losses. And that's not the situation here. The Boston medical schools and some of the other East Coast medical schools, New York and Philadelphia, are on a model where the medical schools and the hospitals are separate institutions. In our case, the hospitals expect us to give them money, because it's costing them clinical revenue when people take time off to teach or to administer the courses. And we really can't pay for that time at the rate that the clinical income would. But we pay out more than $4 million a year to our hospitals and doctors in order to have them teach our medical students, which is very different from any medical school that has a hospital called University Hospital. I was told by one of our Board of Advisors members, who's on the faculty of one of the Western, non-California, but Western state medical schools, told me that the hospital contributes $90 million a year to the medical school. That's almost our whole budget. We don't get any of that. So that's why our tuition's so high, and it's a problem. And as a result, we spend a lot of time raising money for scholarships to help offset the rack rate, which for many students is prohibitive, and to allow us to be able to afford to have a diverse class. And many of you responded generously to an effort that we had for 4 years, a university-wide effort, a financial aid initiative, which Tony Monaco, the president of the university, brought with him from Oxford, something they had done there, where the university agreed to match large gifts of over $100,000, $100,000 or more, for scholarships and named scholarships. And a number of you generously responded to either name a new scholarship, and your money was matched, so the scholarship now has twice what you put in it, and goes to work immediately. Or some of you had existing scholarships that you added significantly to and were able to take advantage of that. And that was remarkably successful. The university raised about $95 million with that, and about a quarter of that was the medical school. So now 30% of the scholarship money we give out now came from that initiative, which has really allowed us to be much more generous with students who need it. And these are all need-based scholarships. We don't give merit scholarships. So we're not using them to attract the top students. We get great students. We don't need to do that. But these are students who just couldn't afford the $60,000 or so that our tuition and fees cost, plus another $20,000 for living expenses to be in Boston. Right now, our students, about more than 2/3 of them leave with debt, and the average debt is around $200,000 of medical school debt, and some of them come with college debt as well. That's really prohibitive. The interesting thing is the common wisdom on this is that it affects the specialties they go into, and it must. But when they're asked there's a graduate questionnaire that all medical students across the country fill out. It's administered by our national organization. And then we get back the results anonymously, but of how Tufts students graded the various questions compared to the national averages. Our students say that the debt has not affected their choice of specialties. And some of them actually talk with their feet. And the class that just matched, 50% of them matched in specialties in medicine, pediatrics, or family medicine. So they all have the potential of doing primary care, although we know that 80% of the people in medicine will end up being subspecialists of one sort or another. But the pediatricians are much more apt to practice pediatrics, and the family docs really do practice. We put out about 25 people who go into family medicine every year, which we're very proud of, and we think is more than any of the other New England or Massachusetts schools put out. So that's been a big success that we're pleased with. Actually, I told you that the Jaharis gift, the most recent one, was $13 million for the anatomy lab. The other $2 million Steve Jaharis, who's a family practitioner, and became one after going through Tufts, which was quite hostile to family medicine. He did it despite his education here. Is anxious to help relieve the financial pressure, and gave us $2 million to start a fund to grant scholarships to students who choose family medicine. So they get it in their last, in the last few months in medical school after they've matched, so we know who's really going into family medicine. And then we look at who are the neediest students with big debt, and they get a chunk of money to help relieve some of that debt. And his hope is that that will grow and that others will contribute to that, and that will help grow primary care, because any of you, I'm sure you've all had the experience that I have of people calling you to ask, where can I find a primary care doctor? And we all become sort of triage agents to try to help people find primary care docs, because there just aren't enough of them. And even if there are, they don't distribute in the places that really need them. Doctors like to be with other doctors and in cultural centers. So doctors tend to congregate in cities and not in rural areas. And the rural areas all over the country, and frankly, all over the world, have this problem that doctors don't want to be there. That's part of the reason we have this program in Maine, is to try to train doctors in rural medicine. It's not a primary care program. It's a rural medicine program. And the hope is that they will be inspired by the people who teach them and grow to love Maine, which many of them do, and that they'll settle in Maine. The count is still out as to how that's working. We know that many of them do their residencies in Maine, which means they're likely to stay there. And many of them do, those that don't, frequently do them in other rural places. So we have a lot of people who go to Colorado or to Washington State, or even to Alaska, to family medicine residencies there. They're likely to come back unless they marry somebody out there who really convinces them to stay. So we've been with the Maine program now for 8 years. We've seen the first group of people who took 3-year residencies now graduate. And of them, about half are back in Maine already. And others are doing another year of sports medicine or a fellowship, and they think that they'll get more of them. So the folks in Maine are very happy with this program. And they've been a great addition to our faculty also. They're really an energized faculty, and they think nothing of getting on the bus. There's a bus that goes nonstop from downtown Portland to South Station, which is walking distance here. And when we have meetings, we had a meeting yesterday, a 1-hour meeting, and there was one person on this committee, it's a search committee, who's the chief of medicine up in Maine. I thought he was going to be on the telephone. He was in the room, got on the bus. There's Wi-Fi on the bus. They can do their work. They walk over here, come to the meeting, go back, get on the bus, and go back to Portland. I think that only works because their previous affiliation was with Vermont Medical School. And anybody who knows New England roads, you can't get from Portland, Maine to Vermont. I actually grew up in New Hampshire, which is in the middle and in between those. And New Hampshire is designed to have north-south roads to get people from Boston up there to spend their money and then get out. And there are no roads that go across the state. So they love the fact that they can get here and that we get there. And there's a lot of interchange going back and forth of faculty and staff to support our 40 students per class who are up there. So that's pretty much the overview that I wanted to talk to you about. And we've got another 15 minutes. Why don't we throw it open to questions? And we'd like to use the microphone because this is being recorded, and they won't be able to hear the questions if you don't. So
I'm here, and my colleague Carrie is there if you have a question. I think it's on. Have a go.
I just wondered if the Maine program, does the state of Maine feel any value in it, and is there funds from them? Since it's
The answer is
geared
yes,
to-
the answer is yes and no.
That's
But it's not quite that clear. The state of Maine is very excited about this program. This program essentially helped them deal with the issue that they really wanted to start their own medical school up there. And they looked at it and they found it was much too complicated and too expensive. And then they came to us, and they came to Dartmouth and to University of Vermont with a proposal that they wanted to do something that would look like their own school and would have some of the advantages of training people in their state, attracting people from their state in the first place into the program, training them there with the hopes that they'll want to stay there. And they raised money for scholarships for 20 students a year, so half the class, for the students who actually come from the state of Maine. So people either born or raised in Maine are eligible for these scholarships. And at half fare, it's pretty much equivalent to going to a state school now. So they get the advantages of what they would if they had a state school without having to put up the many millions of dollars it would cost to actually establish one. And we had a 10-year contract with them. We're now in the process of negotiating the next contract and what's going to change. But basically, I have no doubt we'll come out with another, hopefully 10-year contract. My staff worries about the fact that we're teaching them how to run a medical school, and that someday they'll decide that they've learned how to do it, and that'll be the end of the Tufts relationship, which will be a disaster for us because we've really invested not only a lot of resources, but we're dependent on them now. And we're actually going to go from 40 students a year up to 50 students a year, so that'll be a quarter of our program. But what I keep telling my staff is if we do a good job and show them the value, they'll stay. And right now, they see the value, and I think it's stable. But after the Bay State experience, everybody's worried that we can't afford to lose any more hospitals, or we won't be able to train 200 students. The state did put some money in for the scholarships, but Maine doesn't have a lot of money. Where the scholarship money came from was a lot of little foundations, family foundations, that are committed to Maine. A lot of people have vacationed up there for years and then retire there and really love the state of Maine, much more than I see people loving the state of New Hampshire, where I came from. But I love it, but I haven't put any money up there. But these are moneyed people who, when we and the folks from Maine Medical Center, who are our partners in this, went around to solicit, really produced. And they show up for graduations and for the various events. The community's involved in it. And it's not just Portland. It's up and down the coast. And our students are trained not just in Portland, but we use 9 community hospitals up there, all the way up to Caribou on the Canadian border. We have 2 students up there every year for the year. So it's a challenge to do this, but it's really been a very satisfying program.
So thank you very much, Dean Berman, for the overview. And so my question is regarding the expansion of the class from, let's say, 150 to 200 students. And likewise, it's disappointing to hear that we're no longer having a relationship with basically Bay State, which had trained a lot of students, when we were here, let's say 25 years ago. So what is the factor that led to the disruption of Tufts and Bay State as the western campus of Tufts? And are there any lessons that we've learned so that we can ensure perhaps we can maybe reconnect with that very important western campus?
So the history, as I've been able to learn it, is that when the University of Massachusetts first talked about opening a medical school. The plan was it was going to be in Springfield, and that Bay State was going to be the teaching hospital of it. And apparently through some politics that I wasn't even in Massachusetts at the time, and that I don't understand, the last minute ended up in Worcester and not in Bay State. And I had heard from the folks at Bay State a little about this long before this new turn of events happened, that there's a lot of bitterness about the fact that the UMass is not there, and that they were supposed to be the UMass hospital. What happened was there was a change of leadership at Bay State to a new CEO who brought in a whole new team that had no connection to Tufts and did have connections to UMass. We were aware of the fact that they wanted to do more, and we offered to them, can we start talking about doing something similar to what we've done in Maine with you? Although, frankly, it wouldn't work. There was no way it was going to work the same, because you weren't going to get people in Western Massachusetts who were going to invest in trying to have a program to attract people from Western Massachusetts to this, when Massachusetts people can go to UMass if they want to go to a state school already. But we were in the early stages of discussions about, we're willing to change the relationship, let's talk about it. And they went silent, and we didn't understand what they went silent about. And what they went silent about is that UMass decided, under the leadership of Michael Collins, who is a graduate of ours and was one of our associate deans many years ago, but is now the chancellor, the vice chancellor of UMass, UMass felt the need to expand their class size for monetary reasons, and to be able to bring in out-of-state students that they could charge full tuitions like we do too, where the Massachusetts students, they only charge a much lower tuition. And they had been limited by the state legislature that they could only take Massachusetts students. So they had a small class of around 100 or a few less than that. And they made the decision they wanted to add 25 more full-paying students. And they didn't have the facilities to do that. So they went to Bay State, unbeknownst to us, and Bay State was ripe for it, for a change. And we didn't hear about it until it was a done deal. Anybody from Bay State in the room here?
One of the most memorable experiences I had in med school was the home medical service. Is anything like that still
No, this comes
around?
up every reunion. People have such warm feelings about the home medical service. And although I didn't go to Tufts, I did my internship and residency next door. And I remember the home medical service. I don't know what happened to it. It disappeared years ago. Do any of the other faculty in the room know?
There's a question back here?
In the class of 77, there are 4 of us that were here on military scholarships. Do you still have military scholarship students?
We do still have military scholarships.
How many? More or about the same?
I don't know the number, but although it's not a large number. We encourage students to do it, but there aren't a lot of takers. But we have a few every year. It's a great deal, but it comes with some obligations, obviously.
You mentioned that you've eliminated grades in the majority of your classes, and the emphasis has shifted to the board examination in terms of determination where students get their internships or are placed for their further training. Do you find that that's actually in some ways disadvantaged some students because there are some people who are intrinsically better test takers than they are students, whereas there may be students who are more apt to get A's in a class, but not necessarily get 800 on their boards, where those students are certainly qualified and may have worked a lot harder, but now they're not able to get those placements that they otherwise might have achieved.
Well, a couple of answers to that. I mean, it may disadvantage the student who's an unusually clever test taker, but doesn't, but, but there are a lot of students who are really smart, who aren't very good test takers either. So it works both ways. The way we compensate for it is we get evaluations from the students, from every class that they take, written evaluations, and our dean and associate dean of student affairs, led by Amy Kulik, who's wonderful, write detailed dean's letters that really describes the students well. And they write 200 letters a year. Every letter is different. They don't have any stock paragraphs that they cut and paste. And the program directors around the country have learned that they can trust what these letters tell them. And they differ, they tell the strong points and the weak points of the student, and they get it from the evaluations, even if they don't get letter grades. And as a result, our students do very well in internship placements because of the support that we give them. And a lot of the success of the match is that Amy and her associate, Janet Curl, spend a lot of time with third and fourth year students, helping them figure out what they really want to do and making sure they're being realistic. So students who are applying in specialties that are very hard to get into, who are, okay students, but not top of the class, they try to encourage them to apply to something else as well, that they have a chance of getting in. And as a result, just about all of our students match. We get anywhere from 5 to 8 students a year who we get notified about 4 days before the match that these folks haven't matched. And then we've got 4 days, they have a second round match because a lot of the programs also have spaces that didn't match, the residency programs. And we get another chance to advise them and then to connect them with programs that have spaces, and they do Skype interviews, and we basically get them all placed by match day. So it works well, and our results are terrific. I mean, our students get into the best programs in the country. The folks at Tufts are always disappointed that they didn't get all of them because they like our students. I always judge how we're doing not only by how we do at Tufts, but how many of them get into Harvard hospitals, which have a good name. And we don't tally it, but I went through and tallied it. And I can tell you we got 7 into the Mass General and 6 into the Beth Israel and 2 into the Brigham and 1 into Children's for a total of 16 this year, which is terrific. And I like to tell people that if you go to the Mass General to a doctor there, a practicing doctor, chances are they went to Tufts.
I think we just have time for one more question, and then of course Harris is not going anywhere, so he'll be here tonight and throughout the rest of the day. So I forgot Harris.
2 quick unrelated questions. One follow up on the boards. Do you get any?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Do you? Apparently, there are some medical schools, primarily in the Midwest and South, that do kind of, although they don't advertise it, teach to the boards and tend to fixate on Part 1 board scores. Do you get any data back as to how well Tufts medical students do in comparison to the country? And just a second quick question, do you have any data as to the numbers of accepted medical students who decline the offer due to the high tuition costs?
Yeah, we actually get good data through our the American Association of Medical Colleges that all of these schools belong to. And we submit data to them every year on a wide variety of parameters. And then they feed it back to us, showing us where we stand compared to everybody else. So our students do, above the midline on board scores. And that's satisfactory. We're not teaching to the boards, and they're getting good placements. So we're not really worried about that. We're more worried about supporting students who who need help with test taking and making sure they're ready. And one of the problems that we've run into is for a number of years we had programs, we still have some of them, but we've pared them down, where with not only with Tufts College, but with a number of other schools. So it used to be with Brandeis, Boston College, Holy Cross, and a few others, where in the sophomore year of their undergraduate school, they could apply for early decision at Tufts if they had really good grades in their first 3 semesters at college. And if they continued to have good grades, they were automatically accepted to Tufts. And they didn't have to take boards. And we realize now that was a mistake, because taking the SATs when they were in high school and then taking the MCATs is good training for the boards. So we get a bunch of them. So we still have it with Tufts College, and we have it with 3 or 4 colleges in Maine, Bowdoin, Bates, Colby, and I think, and the University of Maine. So we have this cohort of students who haven't taken MCATs, and they're much more afraid of the boards than ones who have gone through this over and over. So we're trying to deal with that with special programs for helping them improve on that. There was a second part to your question that I forget.
Accepted students who decline the offer.
Oh, so I can tell you, we have 200 slots. We interview about 800 students. We accept about 500. And that whittles down, melts down to about 200 after students who had multiple acceptances. Some choose to come here and some don't. And it's always a nail-biting period of time, and we're in it right now, where we've got more students than we have places for next year. And yesterday I heard that we were at, I think, 232 students, but last week we were at 247, and it was higher the week before. If all goes well, now we're analyzing who they are and how many of them are accepted to other schools, because we have that information and what those schools are. So we're sort of evaluating, if they're accepted here in Harvard, chances are they're not going to come here. And that's good. It gets our number, helps us get our number down. If they're not accepted anywhere else, we know they're going to hang in there, and they're likely to show up in August. And so there's a fair amount of nail biting going on. One year, I think 2 or 3 years ago, we ended up with 217, and we couldn't handle it. And we had to contact a bunch of them and offer them, if you'd like to come and get an MPH first and then enter medical school, we'll give you the MPH at a discount. Or if you want to take a year off, you're guaranteed to come the next year, and we'll hold the price to this year's price. And we whittled it down, I think, to 204. But we're hoping the 200 will match. And that 500 to 200 acceptances to matriculants has held pretty well over the years. We're thinking we may have to cut down the number we accept a little bit because it's a problem if we go over. Not only do we have trouble handling them, but we're accredited for 200 students, and the accrediting body will put up with it if every so often you blow it, because they understand. But if you do it regularly, they think you're doing it to increase tuition.
So please join me in thanking Dean Berman.